If you watch the Lion King movies, you might think Simba and Nala only had one cub, Kiara. But there's something odd about that. The first film ends with Simba presenting his newborn cub to the kingdom. But when The Lion King 2 starts, that cub is suddenly Kiara. So, who was the cub at the end of The Lion King? And more importantly, where is Kopa? Let's break it all down and find out what really happened to Kopa. Kopa was introduced in The Lion King, 6 New Adventures, a collection of books released in the 1990s. These books expanded on Simba's story after the events of the first movie, introducing Kopa as his and Nala's firstborn cub. Unlike Kiara, who was independent and a bit reckless in The Lion King 2, Kopa was curious, adventurous, and always eager to learn. He had a close friendship with another cub named Afua and spent most of his time exploring the Pride Lands, much like how Simba did when he was young. But here's the strange part. Despite Kopa being an important character in these books, he never appears in the Lion King movies, not even a passing mention. There are a few possible explanations, but one thing is certain, something doesn't add up. Now, let's get into the real mystery. Why was Kopa never in The Lion King 2? At the end of The Lion King, we see Simba and Nala presenting their cub to the kingdom. Then The Lion King 2 begins, and suddenly that cub is Kiara. But if you compare the two, they don't look the same. The cub at the end of the first movie has darker fur, while Kiara has a lighter shade. Even the presentation ceremony is different. Rafiki carries the first cub up Pride Rock, but in the sequel, Nala brings Kiara to him instead. So what does this mean? Was the first cub Kopa? And if so, why wasn't he in The Lion King 2? Some fans believe Kopa existed in the movie universe, but was removed from the story before the sequel. Others think he never existed in the movie canon at all. But there's also a darker theory, one that suggests Kopa met a tragic fate. And that's where Zira comes in. If there's anyone who could be responsible for Kopa's absence, it's Zira. Zira was Scar's most loyal follower and the main villain of The Lion King 2. After Simba defeated Scar and reclaimed the throne, Zira refused to accept the new king. She and her followers were eventually banished to the Outlands, but her hatred for Simba never faded. Now, here's where things get interesting. Some fans believe that before Kiara was born, Kopa was the first in line to the throne. If that's true, then Zira might have seen him as a threat, an opportunity for revenge against Simba. One theory suggests that Kopa, being adventurous like his father, wandered too far from the Pride Lands and ended up crossing paths with Zira. She could have used the chance to get rid of Simba's heir once and for all. If something happened to Kopa, it would explain why The Lion King 2 starts with Kiara being raised as Simba's only cub, because Kopa was no longer around. Of course, there's no official confirmation from Disney about this theory, but the idea that Kopa was removed from the story due to a dark event involving Zira has only made fans more suspicious. So, was Zira responsible for Kopa's disappearance? Or is there another reason why he was erased from the Lion King movies? Let's dig even deeper. If you're hoping for a clear answer from Disney, you might be disappointed. According to the official explanation, the cub at the end of The Lion King wasn't even a real character. It was just a symbolic representation of the circle of life. The animators even gave the cub a placeholder name, Fluffy. That's right, Fluffy. At the time, The Lion King 2 hadn't even been planned yet, so the identity of the cub wasn't set in stone. When the sequel finally went into production, the filmmakers decided Simba would have a daughter, and that's how Kiara came into the picture. But this explanation doesn't answer everything. If the cub at the end of the first movie was just a symbol, why does it look so different from Kiara? And why are the two presentation ceremonies staged in completely different ways? This is why many fans believe that Kopa was originally intended to exist in the movie universe, but was erased from the story when the sequel was made. If Disney had acknowledged his existence, they would have needed to explain what happened to him before Kiara's story began. And if the darker theories are true, that would have been a little too grim for a Lion King sequel. So instead of giving an answer, Disney simply ignored Kopa's existence. But there's still more to uncover. Some subtle clues in The Lion King 2 suggest that Kopa's story might have influenced the sequel, whether Disney admits it or not. Even though Disney never officially acknowledged Kopa in the movies, There are a few moments in The Lion King 2 that make fans wonder if a story was originally part of the plan. One of the biggest clues is Simba's overprotectiveness of Kiara. From the very start of the movie, he refuses to let her go anywhere alone, sending Timon and Pumbaa to watch over her even after he promises to give her independence. It's understandable that a father will want to protect his cub, but Simba's fear seems unusually intense, almost like he's lost a child before. Could it be that Kopa's disappearance made Simba paranoid? That after losing his son, he refused to let Kiara out of his sight? Then there's a scene where Simba confronts Zira for the first time. When Kiara and Kopa meet as cubs, Zira appears, and Simba immediately warns her that she knows the penalty for returning to the Pride Lands. The way he reacts is filled with anger and caution, almost like there's a deeper history between them. If Kopa had really been harmed by Zira, this scene makes a lot more sense. It would explain why Simba is so hostile toward her, and why he doesn't trust Kovu, despite Rafiki's insistence that he's different from Scar. There's also a brief moment later in the movie, when Kiara plays with Kovu and ends up in danger. Simba is furious, not just because she broke the rules, but because of how reckless it was for her to get close to the outsiders. It's almost like he's reliving a past tragedy. Of course, none of this proves that Kopa was originally part of the movie's story, but the hints are there. It's possible that when The Lion King 2 was being written, the idea of Kopa existed in early drafts, but Disney ultimately decided to remove him. But if Kopa was erased from the story, then what does that mean for the books that introduced him? The main issue here is the difference in canon. While the books were officially licensed and approved by Disney, they weren't created by the same team behind the movies. As a result, what happens in the books doesn't always match up with the film continuity. For many fans, this split feels like a deliberate erasure of Kopa from the cinematic narrative, a clean break that leaves us wondering what might have been. One possibility is that Kopa was simply never meant to be part of the movie timeline. Since The Lion King, 6 New Adventures was written by different authors and not directly tied to filmmakers, Kopa may have been created without any coordination with the sequel's development. When The Lion King 2 was being written, the team likely ignored the books and went in a completely new direction with Kiara. But then there's a more debated theory, that Disney actively erased Kopa to avoid confusion. Some fans believe that early versions of The Lion King may second have included him, but that he was removed during production to streamline the story. If they had acknowledged him, they would have had to explain where he went. And for a family-friendly movie, they might have wanted to avoid any dark backstory involving his disappearance. It's also worth noting that Disney has done this before. Many franchises under their control have had expanded universe characters erased or reworked when new projects come along. A well-known example is Star Wars, where many books and comics were later declared non-canon after Disney took over. So was Kopa a victim of the same process? Possibly. If Disney wanted The Lion King 2 to stand on its own without complicating the story with a missing heir, it would make sense to remove him from the narrative entirely. Which brings us to the final question. Should Kopa be considered part of the Lion King story, or is he just a character from a forgotten book series? Well, despite Disney's silence on the topic, Kopa's story has remained one of the biggest mysteries in the Lion King fandom. Fans continue to debate his fate, analyze possible clues in the movies, and imagine what his life could have been like. In the end, it's up to each fan to decide. If you prefer to stick to the movies, then Kopa was never part of the official timeline. But if you enjoy the expanded universe and the deeper lore of The Lion King, then Kopa's story adds an interesting and tragic layer to Simba's legacy. Regardless of where you stand, one thing is certain. Kopa may not have made it into movies, but it has definitely left a lasting impact on the Lion King fandom. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories.